Going to talk in this presentation about myelin. I've put in brackets muscle memory there. Basically, what we used to think of as muscle memory, now we're thinking is more likely something called myelination. So this is the idea that your brain has a way of, if there's something you're doing a lot, your brain has a way of saving those preferences, as an example, so that it takes less energy to make them happen again in the future. Now, in case anyone's interested, the reason this used to be called muscle memory was a patient called HM in the 1950s, had surgery on his brain, and afterwards couldn't remember any conscious thoughts. After a while, they started giving him different tasks. He would have no short-term memory, so he would never remember doing the same thing before. But some of the tasks were involved with movement, so they had him try and retrace a drawing while looking into a mirror, and he did pretty badly at it the first time. But every other time afterwards, he didn't remember having done it before, but he got slightly better at doing it. So from that, they started to theorize that maybe it's not just in the brain. Maybe there's some sort of memory formation actually outside of your brain and in your muscles. So they called it, logically, muscle memory. What we know now is that there's small elements of muscle memory, but actually it's more likely that although the surgery affected his conscious memory, he still remembered the actions of the movements, and that is stored in a different place. And that's where myelin comes into the picture and will be quite useful when we're thinking about how we train. So what is myelin? It's basically fat. It's a layer of fat that wraps around nerves. So nerves being the connectors between two neurons or brain cells. It'll wrap around so that it increases the pressure on the inside. When you increase the pressure on the inside, basically you make the signal travel faster, and it takes less energy to do that. So if there was no myelin, if you wanted to, say, lift my arm up, it would take me quite a lot of energy to force that to happen. When I wrap the myelin around, because it's super high pressure, it doesn't take any extra energy, and actually it happens much quicker. So I can lift my arm up more automatically with less energy used up by our brain. It's associated with developing unconscious competence in our actions. So unconscious competence is anything that we can do where we don't need to think about it. So walking is the ultimate example. Almost everybody is able to walk unconsciously. It doesn't matter what distractions you give them, doesn't matter how much you change their environment, they'll still be able to walk, and their conscious attention will be on other things. So myelin's really useful if we want to form a habit. When we're thinking about drilling the basics, we kind of want as much myelin as possible around that so that we can start focusing on making the skill more complicated. So if we're going to use this in our training, we need to know a little bit of how it works in forming habits. So the first thing to know is it is linked with dopamine. Dopamine, which we'll explain in another video, is related to pleasure. So basically what that means is when your brain is trying to wrap this fat around the nerves, when you've done something enough times to say, this is important, I'm probably going to do it a whole lot more times, your brain will start trying to coat those nerves, the ones that it needs, in fat. And it's going to want you to repeat the action over and over again. So after a while, once it realizes you're going to keep doing this, it's going to make that experience enjoyable so that you keep doing it for a little bit longer, so that it reminds itself of which nerves exactly it needs to be covering. So provides a pleasurable experience. That basically means when this is happening, it's going to feel pretty good. So what we can take away from that is when you get, so let's say I've learned to juggle and I can juggle 3 balls and it feels really great. And then you get into that mode where you just go into like a trance-like state where you just want to do that and nothing else for ages and ages. Now, at that point, you've got 2 choices. Either you can move up to the more complex skill, or you can just stay having fun. A lot of people would recommend that actually you don't stay at the level that you're at because it looks like you've mastered that skill, and actually what you should do is now make it a little bit more complicated, and that will save time in the long run. Actually, because the brain is still myelinating, wrapping the fat around these nerves, it wants you to keep doing that, because if it doesn't do that, and if you just start throwing more complexity onto it, it'll start thinking of that as a totally different thing. So then you've got to learn how to do the more complicated thing without any real understanding of the skill at its base level. Whereas if you were to keep doing it, just keep doing the basic thing, just get the reps in, bang out for a little while, you wrap the myelin around so that when you get to the more complex skill, your brain's already in the habit of doing the thing that way, and it just makes it a little bit easier. So a useful benchmark to think about is when you can perform the skill comfortably with quite a bit of distraction, that's probably the sign that that you're ready to make it a bit more complex. And that will usually coincide with, as we said, myelination and dopamine are closely linked. It usually coincides with when it starts to become a little bit more boring. So that's actually quite handy, is when it's fun, you should be doing it. And when it's not fun, you should not be doing it. And it seems, I think we get quite into, we shouldn't think in that way. Like proper learning isn't going to be fun, but actually our brain pretty much knows how to motivate us to do the things that are useful. So actually we can think of it that simply. So as well as habit forming, myelin can also play a role in habit breaking. Most of you will probably have heard, you want to form a habit, you want to form a good habit to begin with. You don't want to form a bad habit, because actually it's really, really difficult to break the bad habit. And what they're referring to from the point of view of myelin is when you've wrapped all of the nerves involved in that much fat that before any other choice can be taken, your brain's already gone, yeah, we just do this now. It's going to be if you want to fight fire with fire and try and do that, but in a different way, it's going to be a very slow process. The first steps of that, you're going to have to catch yourself right at the very beginning of when that thought, or when that unconscious thought kicks into action, and you'll need quite a lot of focus to really break that pathway, and then try and myelinate the other pathway that you want as much as you just did with that one. That's the danger. There's a couple of things that's useful to know, though, in terms of it doesn't have to necessarily be that way. So that is true if you are trying to form a habit that your brain doesn't see as more valuable than the one you're currently using. So dopamine, again, is something you can use to your advantage. If you can make the new habit that you're trying to make more enjoyable than the previous habit, then dopamine's going to get released and your brain's going to like that you're doing something that's better. And then it's going to encourage that actually there's less fat stored on the old habit, and more moved over to the new one. An example of this is in things like posture. So in quite a few cases, when people go to a physio or into Pilates or Feldenkrais or whatever it is they want to do to improve their posture, in some instances, you see that actually it takes a very long time. Sometimes you get people, they go in, they do one exercise, and magically they're just fixed. They're standing up straighter. Maybe not all their problems are gone, but you see this huge result in a very short time period. Now, that shouldn't be possible based on what we just talked about. If you've been sitting with bad posture for 30 plus years, and you just do one thing, your brain shouldn't go, oh yeah, let's reset everything, because it took a lot of energy to form everything in that way. So even if it was a better position to be in, your brain should still go the route that takes the less energy. Luckily with dopamine, if you put yourself, so to use the posture example, if whatever minor correction you made, suddenly you're breathing much better, which is a huge benefit to your brain. Oxygen is the fuel for all your brain cells and all of the cells in your body. Anything that makes you breathe better, your brain's going to go, oh man, I want more of that. And it releases dopamine to try and make you chase that. And suddenly your body's forcing you against this habit. So instances where your brain can see the advantage will help. Instances, if you're not talking about posture and you're just talking about learning a skill in a slightly different way, anything that you can make a game out of it or add some extra focus or some extra task can get dopamine involved a little bit as well. So there's another video on dopamine. Go check it out to see how you can use that to your advantage. The other way that you can look at this as well is if you think about developing it as an entirely new neural circuit. So when you're thinking about breaking a habit, usually you're thinking of you do something one way and you want to do it almost that way but slightly different. And because what you're doing is so close to what you don't want to be doing, and that's the thing that is habituated, it's myelinated, it's ready to go super fast, your brain has lots of opportunities to stop the way you're going and jump into the other thing. Whereas if you were to take it from a totally different perspective, so let's say you're learning to throw, if you were to think, all right, I'm going to focus entirely on just what my feet are doing. Normally when I throw, I think about my elbow position or I think about where the ball's going. I'm just going to think about something totally different, and I'm going to work on that until that becomes a habit. Then I'm going to work on where I look, or I'm going to work on a different size ball. I'm going to learn to throw a different size ball, so it's something to distract away from what I'm currently used to. You can start building a circuit where your brain doesn't realize you're actually trying to break away from that habit. And once you've built that habit well enough that it travels, the pathway travels pretty quickly and you can do it relatively unconsciously, you can then start trying to modify it closer and closer to the old habit. And two things will happen there. Not only will you have developed a strong habit that your brain will still want to do, if you haven't been working in the old way, those connections are going to start to break down anyway. So it then becomes much easier to transfer things across. So there we go. That's dopamine. Not dopamine, that was myelin. Habit forming, habit breaking, super useful. Key takeaways, basically, your brain will tell you what it likes and it will tell you what it doesn't like. So it's always useful to check in and just see, are you actually enjoying what you're doing? Because that will give you an indicator of what things you should keep going with.